Welcome back to the channel. I am the Digital Sleuth. Today, we are stepping away from the dark web to look at a man who was executing cybercrimes before the internet even existed. This is the story of Robert Vesco, a high school dropout from Detroit who became the architect of the largest financial theft of his era. A heist totaling $1.6 billion in today's money. It is May 31st. 1995. In Havana, Cuba. Robert Vesco is peering through his curtain when his stomach drops. 16 men in olive uniforms are surrounding his villa. For 23 years, Vesco has outrun every agency on Earth. But his luck just ran out. Here is the twist. The men at his door are not FBI or CIA. They are Cuban state security, sent by the very same dictator who gave him sanctuary 12 years ago. To understand how the world's greatest escape artist ended up in a Cuban prison cell, we have to go back to 1970, to a massive mutual fund called Investors Overseas Services. This fund was a colossus, managing over $2 billion for everyday people like dentists in Germany and factory workers in Japan. But the fund was bleeding out, and the directors were desperate for a savior. They found 35-year-old Robert Vesco. On the surface, he looked like a white knight. But in reality, he was running a debt-fueled machine that was already on the verge of collapse. Vesco swooped in with a $5 million loan that he did not actually have, making bold promises of rescue. The board was so desperate they handed him the keys to the kingdom. By January of 1971, Vesco had seized control of a $2 billion empire for the price of a used yacht. And that is when the heist truly began. Vesco had a private code name for what came next: Project LPI, which stood for Looting and Plundering Incorporated. He was not joking. In a modern cybercrime documentary, we would be talking about SQL injections or crypto mixers. But in the early 70s, Vesco's malware was a complex maze of shell companies. He scattered these entities across the Bahamas, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Panama. He chose these locations specifically for their banking secrecy laws. The dark web of the analog age. Within months, money began flowing out of investor accounts and into Vesco's hidden pockets through a web of fake transactions. It was a 1,970 seconds version of the FTX collapse. A charismatic financier gutting funds behind a mask of legitimacy. Vesco had one advantage that modern hackers lack, and that was latency. In 1971, regulators communicated by mail and international wire transfers took days to settle. He was betting that by the time anyone realized the vault was empty, he would be untraceable. For 2 years. He was absolutely right. By the end of 1972, $224 million had vanished from the funds. Vesco did not hide his wealth. He flaunted it. He bought a personal Boeing 707 jet and named it the Silver Phyllis. He installed a disco, a sauna, and a bar inside the fuselage, throwing champagne parties at 30,000 feet while stolen money fueled every mile. But Vesco made a critical miscalculation. He assumed no one important was paying attention. He was wrong. By late 1972, the SEC started tracing the money flows. Investors were screaming about vanished funds, and the U.S. government began its hunt. The SEC filed a sweeping civil suit accusing him of systematically looting the funds. Vesco could do the math. The most powerful nation on earth was preparing to cage him. Most men would negotiate a surrender or flee to a remote corner of the world. But Vesco chose a third option, so audacious it bordered on insane. He decided to bribe the President of the United States to make the whole problem disappear. But how do you put a price tag on presidential protection? Under the cover of darkness, a private jet touched down in Washington, D.C. Two of Vesco's associates carried a single leather briefcase containing $200,000 in crisp $100 bills. This was a secret donation to President Nixon's re-election committee. Delivered just days before a new campaign finance law would have required disclosure, Vesco's message was simple: make the SEC investigation go away. And in return, the Nixon campaign receives a fat infusion of untraceable money. For a brief moment, it appeared to work. Whispers circulated in Washington that the SEC was backing off. And Vesco even kept one of Nixon's nephews on his payroll. But Vesco had stepped into a chaos he did not understand. Just 2 months after his cash delivery, operatives broke into the Watergate complex. Here is the direct connection. Vesco's untraceable cash sat in the same secret safe that financed the Watergate burglary. His bribe was literally bankrolling the century's biggest political scandal. By early 1973, the Watergate scandal was unraveling, and the press caught wind of the shadowy donations. Vesco was publicly named as the source of an illegal contribution. And the story detonated. Instead of buying protection, he had purchased a starring role in a national scandal. Whatever influence he hoped to buy evaporated overnight. And the SEC fraud case roared back to life. By the summer of 1973, a criminal warrant was prepared for his arrest. But when lawmen arrived to slap on the cuffs, they found an empty chair. Robert Vesco had slipped out of the country with his fortune intact, leaving the Justice Department looking like fools. But his Plan B was even bolder than Plan A. If he could not buy the American system, he would buy his own country to shield him. He surfaced openly in Costa Rica. Living like a king, he poured millions into the personal projects of the Costa Rican president, José Pepe Figueres. In exchange, the legislature passed the Vesco law, specifically tailored to block any U.S. extradition request. Vesco had achieved something extraordinary. He had bought a country-sized shield, but the welcome mat eventually frayed. And by 1978, a new president pushed him out. Vesco became a wandering millionaire with a price on his head, hopping from port to port as the U.S. pressured governments to refuse him refuge. He landed in the Bahamas and struck an alliance with Carlos later, a cocaine kingpin. Vesco allegedly helped later bribe officials to ignore drug planes in exchange for a piece of the action. Sensing the heat from the U.S. drug enforcement agencies, he fled again. This time, he tried to create a brand new country called the Sovereign Order of New Aragon. He planned to lease an island, print passports, and establish a government answerable to no foreign power. He wanted to be the monarch of his own sanctuary. But the plan leaked and the deal collapsed. Running out of friendly shores, Vesco made one last strategic move. In 1983, he flew to Cuba. Fidel Castro opened the door. Enjoying the chance to needle Washington, Vesco lived quietly in a leafy suburb of Havana for over a decade, appearing to have finally reached checkmate against the U.S. government. But his greatest enemy was his own greed. Even in sanctuary, he could not resist the urge for one more hustle. He began a pharmaceutical scam involving a wonder drug called TX, claiming it could cure cancer and AIDS. He even convinced members of Castro's inner circle to invest. When the fraud was discovered, Castro was humiliated. On May 31st, 1995, the reckoning arrived at Vesco's door. The long arm of justice that finally grabbed Robert Vesco was not American, but Cuban. He was sentenced to 13 years for economic crimes against the state. The man who manipulated world powers and outran the FBI for decades ended his days in a Havana jail cell. Wearing prison garb instead of designer suits, he was released in 2005 due to failing health and died 2 years later. He was buried in an unmarked grave, far from the spotlight he once craved. Vesco's story is a pioneer's tale of how money and information can move faster than laws. But it is also a blueprint for how we protect ourselves today. We don't worry about men in Boeing 707 seconds anymore. We worry about digital predators. But the red flags remain the same. If an investment promises high returns with no risk, it is a scam. Always verify your sources. Check the SEC's Edgar system. And never let a stranger create a false sense of urgency. Most importantly, use multi-factor authentication on every financial account. If Vesco had to bypass modern security protocols, his heist would have stalled at the first gate. Robert Vesco believed he could buy his way out of anything. But even the greatest escape artist eventually runs out of doors. I am the Digital Sleuth. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the original financial ghost. Stay secure. Stay skeptical. And I will see you in the next investigation.